we did an intro, and I wasn't
Okay.
I wasn't recording.
Yeah.
I'm Dan Carlson, the recorder of the Lost Blokes. This is why I include Kugel Summer Shandy, our non-sponsor sponsor.
Hi, I'm Dave Nesbitt, another quarter of the Lost Blokes. Currently sitting here with my Iron Maiden glass that I put non-alcoholic ginger beer, but then from out of nowhere, this guy dressed in a tuxedo who said his name was Lloyd poured whiskey into it. So, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, he spilled some on you too, didn't he?
No, just a teeny bit.
Yeah,
He does that.
he
And then
does that.
also,
It's a shtick.
yeah. And then also I figured, well, if he's going to pour whiskey, I might as well have a beer with it. So I've got a vanilla bean infusion from a local brewery.
Vanilla bean.
Yeah, it's basically they took their ale and then they ground up some vanilla beans in the bottom to add some taste notes to it, and it works out really well.
I'm going to grab another beer because I'm actually down to the last couple swallows of this one, so I'll be
Okay.
right back.
Hi. So anyway, I'll be streaming a game later. We might talk about that, but if you're on Twitch, look for Raging Kelp 23. Add me, please. I could use the numbers. I'm trying to slowly work my way up to being an affiliate on there. Oh, Dan's back. I should stop the pimping.
Oi, mister! You me dad?
Like, comment, and subscribe.
Go.
Doctor Sleep is the sequel to The Shining, based on the novel by Stephen King. It takes place about probably 6 months after the original The Shining at first, and we see Danny, still a child, and his mother now living in Florida. He's still beset by ghosts, and he's troubled by it. He meets the ghost of Halloran from the first movie in the park, and Halloran teaches him how to lock away the spirits in little mind chests so that they can't bother him. And flash forward 30 years, and Danny's alcoholic, and he's with a hooker. It's a bad situation. He got in a fight the night before. She took his money so they could have some coke. He steals the money back from her. Halloran advises against it. We see what happens when Danny doesn't listen to his intuition. Danny then has a lot of trouble, ends up moving to a new town where a sponsor helps him get a new place so he can kick his alcohol habit. And things begin to get weird because there's a vampire cult called the True Knot who suck the essence out of people with the Shining. They murder a boy, and it's the most horrible murder scene in a mainstream movie you'll watch. Yeah. And the experience is so traumatic to another girl with the Shining that she experiences it, and it's so strong that they feel her presence, so they now know she exists. It's now Danny's project spiritually to protect this girl and to train her and to keep her safe from her own powers and from the powers of these people who are after people with the Shining. It all culminates in a big showdown at the Overlook Hotel, which is the location of the original The Shining, where Rose the Hat, Abra, the little girl,
and time's up.
Pretty good. I didn't get
pretty
all
good.
I actually got to the 3/4 mark.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a showdown at the end that's really satisfying, and I guess we can dive deep into the movie now. It's probably better than the Shining as a story. Maybe not as a movie, but
I'll argue with that one, but yeah,
it might actually be better as a movie. It's not as I'll say it's not as viscerally scary as a whole as the original. But it is it's a very satisfying movie. It's one of the few horror movies I could say probably follows the hero's journey.
True that.
Yeah. the hero's journey. I think the only other horror movie that comes to mind is Phantasm, and that doesn't end well. This one follows the hero's journey for Danny and also for Abra, and it provides a nice contrast to what everything they're going through by showing a villain who's not. It's a cliche in comic books and everything to say we're not so different, you and I. But here's the case in a movie where you can look at the villain and say, yeah, they're really not that different. The only thing that stopped Danny and Abra from becoming like Rose is time and circumstance.
True.
And in that way, it's sort of compassionate toward everyone in the movie in a weird sort of bizarre way. It's still disturbing. There's still true evil portrayed in this movie, but it's just it's kind of amazing that I think this is one of the few, along with like The Mist, Shawshank Redemption, and like Green Mile, Stephen King books that really capture what he does in a book on screen.
I think it's spectacular. I mean, the fact that it brings back so many of the original feels of.
I'm sorry, Dave. Look at who's talking to us.
What?
I know, it's just so weird to me to see a cartoon character reviewing us.
I know. Actually, we should do more of that. One day we'll all just kind of like just
all
show
four
up.
of us. Yes.
I'll just have like my avatar will always have like a beer in his hand, you know.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah.
It just brings back so many of the original feels of the original film. So,
Dave, you were talking about how it's very explicit in a way that he gets a sponsor that helps him.
Yeah.
You were talking about kind of he's sort of Abra's sponsor with her powers.
Well, I think that it's kind of telling that the addiction metaphor kind of runs its way all the way through it, because that's pretty much what King was writing about in his own self-loathing and dealing with his issues, primarily with alcohol and then later cocaine. But Halloran is basically, in his own rather unique way, kind of Danny's mentor and sponsor as a child and then later on as an adult, teaching him how to bottle up all of these things in such a way that they don't damage him the way that they used to. And then later on, those things become weapons when he's dealing with Rose the Hat and the True Knot. And then later on, he's also the reason why it is that Danny doesn't turn into something like the True Knot, where he teaches him, how to basically not fall prey to his baser instincts.
Because he was on that path a little bit when he was with that lady and her child, and he left them kind of with.
I love how Halloran just kind of shows up and guides him so that he's not a dick.
Yeah.
Or at least pointing out, look, this is what you're turning into your dad. You might want to dial this back a little bit.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I think that that's what works for Halloran. And also later on when, Abra is now trying to get a line on her life after all of this. And now Danny is basically her Halloran as the spirit that follows her around and tries to help her.
And his first piece of advice to her is kind of destructive, but he means well. He tells her to bury her shine, not use her powers. It's to keep her safe, but it's also what he's been doing and what's causing him to be the way, he has become.
And I mean, and then you can also go with the other metaphor in that, this is when you take a look at the True Knot, they are what happens when someone's baser instincts are completely unchecked and when it becomes all about feeding your addiction. You're doing the most horrifying, you're basically going around and, damaging and killing children to keep yourself alive. And I think that that's one of the most terrifying elements of it, because anybody who's ever dealt with an addiction issue knows at the core of their being that they can sink way, way lower than anybody ever thought that they could.
Yeah. Well, and that's I do sense some of the loss in the Rose the Hat character. Like if she had her choice, she would not be doing the horrible shit she's doing.
Yeah.
But these circumstances, I mean, she's still culpable to them. She's not, and that's not an excuse, but it really is the sort of situation where, okay, well, if we're going to keep living, we've got to do this. And
I think that she's kind of accepted the entire notion that in order to be what it is that she wants to be, she has to continue to be this horrible person who does horrible shit.
mhm. And she uses it to justify a lot. She actually says that to Abra during their showdown, is that like, give it a few years, you'll be like me, kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. And it's that element, again, we're going back to sitting around, because The Shining is both a blessing and a curse. Um,
John, that's funny, but could you not distract
Sorry,
us?
no, I'm not trying to be funny. I'm actually looking for for like poses that make sense.
Okay. Well, keep moving around. It's fine, but
Yeah.
don't pop in and out.
Sorry.
this also just drops down and comes back up. What the fuck was I talking about again?
It would be funnier if that guy behind you was closer every time.
Speaks up, you know.
Okay, Dave, go ahead.
But the Shining is both a blessing and a curse. It's a power that allows you to do things, but it also when we were talking in chat prior to this, there is a saying, an idea amongst fighter pilots, when two fighters from opposing sides are trying to track each other, and they basically enter what they refer to as a radar duel, where they're using radar to basically pick up on the other person, but you can only use it for a few seconds, because once you turn yours on, they know where you are. And I think that's just, let me finish this real quick.
Yeah.
I think that's part and parcel of the problem with The Shining. The more that you use it, the more that the dark things out there that feed on it are aware that you exist.
Well, the thing about, when I watched the original Shining, I always thought of The Shining as a more explicit narrative device to speak to you about your intuition. Like, I always felt like, although in this movie it becomes more obvious. I mean, it was always a psychic ability, but it has more lore in this movie than it did in the first one. So in the first one, I always thought of it as listen to your intuition, and there is an element of that in here. But I like that Halloran tells Danny, as a little boy, you're going to have to help other people the way I helped you. And that's what he's avoiding doing with Abra. He doesn't want to get involved, but eventually that's what he has to do. And it's sort of Yoda's lesson to Luke: pass on what you have learned. He's doing that in this movie. He's passing on what he's learned with The Shining to this girl who, if he wasn't there, could become dangerous. Could become the next Rose the Hat, like the replacement.
She could become much worse than that, because she has no motivation. Rose the Hat and her group have a specific motivation, and this girl hasn't developed any motivation. So, like a supervillain with superpowers, with no direction and no reason, is much more dangerous than a supervillain with an agenda. Because look at Brightburn, for example. They have this kid, and he has absolutely no reason or direction for what he's doing. So he just starts destroying and killing and all that kind of stuff. Same thing with this psychic stuff. They can like blow up people's heads and stuff.
Dave, being that you co-host a podcast about supervillainy, do you have any supervillain angle on this? Is it John on to something? It sounds like it.
Well, I mean, clearly for me, you take a look at the True Knot, and they are quite obviously the supervillains of this particular group. They all have, various takes on what it is they do. You've got Snakebite, you've got Crow Daddy. Everybody has a particular ability, and it allows them to hunt these kids who have this capacity. But at the same time, when you take a look at Abra, she is at that precipice of entering into adolescence, which is a period of time when you're sitting around trying to analyze all of your motivations and who you are. And I think that she could have just as easily have fallen in with the crew that Rose the Hat and such had and been a part of that. but falling under the influence of Danny as now her spirit mentor, actually, because he can sit there and go, look, I have made all of these horrible errors in the past,
Mhm.
and you might want to pay attention to it. So she's really sitting right on that edge of, which way am I going to fall? Am I going toward my higher self or my baser instincts?
Yes. I found this very moving because it is about listening to the part of yourself that wants you to do what you know is what your soul wants,
Yes.
for lack of a better way to put it. When you could go the other way easily. And I love that it's done. It's done so subtly because there's characters who represent every point of view in this movie.
Oh, yeah.
And each of them, you can see where they're coming from. They feel real. I mean, you see the snake bite. She could have her own movie. That whole story could be its own movie.
Oh,
But
she's a character that could definitely warrant having an entire book and movie written about her.
But
Oh,
she's
yeah.
she's a side character in this movie. That's how much it has on its mind. I just love that.
But I think that that's also returning to, when I sit down and I take a look at the book The Shining versus the film Doctor Sleep. I still haven't read the book of Doctor Sleep, but there's a feeling of The Shining was kind of blasted out in a fit of self-loathing as Stephen King was dealing with the repercussions of his own addiction issues. And Doctor Sleep feels more like, upon further reflection, wow, addiction really sucks. But let me talk about the deeper elements that we all miss about it.
I
that we don't
also
understand regarding it.
Right. I also
Yeah.
thought that The Shining, I think that's one of the reasons why he was so upset with Kubrick's Shining, because Kubrick was more interested in making a horror movie. And I love The Shining. I'm not criticizing, but it's certainly not the book that King wrote, and it's not what he was
No.
trying. And it's not the book. It's not the things that King was trying to say with that book.
Also, I think, and we'll argue about this, but from a technical standpoint, I actually enjoyed Doctor Sleep more than Kubrick's The Shining. I've always felt like Kubrick, his material has always been his shooting style is very sterile to me, and Doctor Sleep feels more organic to the characters. I had to throw that one out.
Hey man, I consider this the reason I chose this movie is I consider it one of the three great modern sequels, the other two being Blade Runner 2049 and Trainspotting 2. I think all three of those were fucking like
and Aliens.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about modern. I'm talking about like in the last few years.
Yeah.
And those three really hit on all cylinders to like take their characters in the logical, not to give us another taste of what
Are you
we
saying
had
I'm
before.
old?
Yes,
Yes.
I am.
Dude, I'm older than you. Deal with it.
I'm 50, dude. I'm a month older than you are, so cope.
Yeah. Yeah, Dan, you'll always be older than me.
Yeah, well, unless I die before you, then I'll be younger.
Valid point, actually.
Yeah. So
how does that work?
Because once you die, you don't age.
You actually age in reverse.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what I was saying about it's one of the three best modern sequels, and Ewan McGregor's in two of them.
Yeah.
So Ewan McGregor, put him in your movies, you can't go wrong.
Yeah. He's one of those actors that just kind of elevates everything that he's in. I've always loved the fact that anything he does, he just kind of jumps all the way in and treats the material. I've never seen him acting in a film where he feels like it's something that he should hold in contempt.
So I think, okay, so Ewan McGregor is I'd have to say like one of my absolute favorite actors. I mean, every movie he's ever been in, I've enjoyed. It's just like, how do you get all of these, characters exactly like, perfectly like they're supposed to be?
You listen to your inner Halloran.
Yeah. You definitely own up on that.
Yeah, that's true.
And Danny, I got to admit that Ewan McGregor is not who I expected Danny to be when he grew up, but I'm perfectly happy with them having chosen him.
That was a casting choice. And when I heard it, I immediately went, okay, I'm sold. Yeah, I'm in.
Well, not to put too fine a point on it, but my favorite scene in this movie probably is when he finally is at the Overlook Hotel and gets into the bar scene with his father, played this time by Henry Thomas, and Henry Lloyd. Is it Lloyd? They
Yes.
call him Lloyd. He looks
Lloyd.
like, so he looks like Jack Nicholson, but he's still being referred to as Lloyd. And he's trying to get Danny to take a drink, and Danny says a man takes a drink takes a drink takes the man, and that like gave me chills.
Yeah.
Because it's like that's the path that he knows that he has to, that literally in that moment he has to choose that path, the path that he just leaves and lets this girl get swallowed up by this garbage, or he stands with her and protects
Yeah,
her.
and how do you justify that? I mean, how do you justify you know, doing something like that, leading someone into their little pit of despair and then robbing them on top of it? I mean, what?
Okay. I'm not talking about the robbery in the early stage. I'm talking about the moment when he has to choose between leaving Abra
Oh yeah.
to leaving Abra to the True Knot, because all it would require of him is to just do nothing, and
Just to
his
walk away.
and his problems would go away. But he has to choose.
And
Go ahead.
and of course, all evil needs to succeed is for good men to do nothing.
And I think that's the part there where when we're talking about the scene earlier with, the hooker and the money and all the other stuff, that is a moment when you sit there and realize you've hit absolute bottom. You now have to face yourself as the absolute worst human being that you could possibly be.
And am I wrong? Did the baby die?
Yes.
So he has to live with that because he chose to allow that situation to happen. And
just like in Train Spotting.
Yeah. Oh wow. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Although in this one, it's dealt with more. I think in Train Spotting, it's there, and then it's presented as something that they just move on from.
And then also I think it becomes an impetus for him to start to realize, wow, my life is horrifyingly fucked up.
Yeah.
That's because Best Rules are this and Train Spotting, which are both films about addiction.
Mm-hmm. Until that moment in Train Spotting, and I think this was the right creative decision. Addiction is presented as very ebullient and joyful. Everything up until that moment is you could be watching Pulp Fiction or something like that, and then that hits you in the face, and you're like, oh, I forgot we're watching a movie about people that are in the throes of the lowest levels of addiction.
But I think that's also one of the things that's a key part of that film. And in a way, we kind of miss when you look at Ewan McGregor in Train Spotting, he's a person who is basically using heroin as a means to kind of forget where he is. Because there's the scene where he talks about it being complete shit to be Scottish. Mm-hmm. And the fact that he's living in a very dark space, so he gets high all the time to get over it. Danny is basically using alcohol and cocaine as a way to numb himself to the horrifying shit that he's had to deal with. So the two of them both.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
He's numbing himself, but he's afraid he's afraid to claim his power, because claiming his power would make him vulnerable.
Yeah.
And it's as much trying to dampen down his own abilities and his own agency and power as it is anything else. And that's kind of why it's so important that he helps this girl. This girl helps him as much as he helps her, because he has to embrace his power in order to show her how to do it. And she does call him out on it, I think, a couple of times, doesn't she?
Yes.
And that's the whole point of the movie, is that he has to embrace his power in order to gift that to her the way that Halloran gifted it to him. Halloran, ended up dying for him, and he ends up dying for Abra. And I just thought it was very moving. Through the whole movie, he talks about, well, in several scenes, he talks about how his mother couldn't look him in the eye because she always thought of Jack Nicholson whenever
Yeah.
she looked at him. And the final scene that he's with his mom, she's staring directly in his eyes and no, not breaking gaze with him at all, and just totally accepting him and his power. That's the moment when he totally accepted who he was and what he had to do. And I just thought
Yeah.
that was
So
very powerful.
that's okay. I was going to just say that we should also talk about how good the actors and actresses were that were playing parts of other people from the what?
This is one of the things that my when I was discussing this with my boss, he didn't like, but I actually think that they did a great job of capturing the spirit.
Yeah.
They didn't quite look like the people, but they definitely captured the spirit of them.
Yeah, but they didn't have to necessarily look exactly like the people.
Right.
When you think about it, especially when somebody who haven't seen for decades, you know, when you're viewing them in your mind's eye, your memory kind of creates
good point.
Kind of creates an idealized or a different version of them where, I mean, Jack Torrance in Doctor Sleep also, I mean, with the way that the character is put together, also has a certain resemblance to Danny. He can see a little bit of himself. And I think that absolutely works.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that the one who played Danny's mom did what?
Wendy.
Yes.
Sounded so much like her. It was insane.
Sounded like her, but also looked quite a bit like her.
And this wasn't that shirt they had her wearing perfect, that striped shirt that she was wearing on the beach.
Yeah.
I just thought that was awesome. It was just a nice touch.
I can't get enough of this movie. I really think it's probably, like you said, you know, one of the great sequels. And I don't like, you know, pigeonholing it into modern sequels. I just like to say it's one of the great sequels.
It is. Dave, you actually said you would challenge the idea that The Shining is better.
Yeah.
So I'd like you to expound on that.
From a technical standpoint, this is a problem I've always had with a lot of Kubrick's films. Actually, one of the few films I don't have this problem with is A Clockwork Orange. I'm going to go see that. It's going to be playing at the Alamo relatively soon. I'm going to go see it again.
The original, or are you talking about a remake?
No,
no, this is the original Clockwork Orange.
There is no remake as far as I'm aware.
As far as I'm aware.
Okay.
But Kubrick stuff always feels very sterile to me. Like, it's very observational. It's almost documentary-like. And in this film, everything feels a lot more organic. You feel like you're much more involved with the characters. And there's a sense of separation in Kubrick stuff that I don't appreciate much this way, but I think that Mike Flanagan has a better feel for making you feel the characters. I mean, Kubrick, and this might just be me because this could be sour grapes on my part. But Kubrick stuff always seems like he's very fast. He's very impressed with how all of his stuff works and looks. And also, I think part of it is also that I don't, as much as The Shining is an incredible piece of work, I really hate the process that he used on a lot of the actors, Shelley Duvall in particular. I think the young lady who played Abra is going to have an amazing fucking career.
I hope so.
Yeah, she's just absolutely amazing. Also, the Jessica Ferguson, the lady who plays
Rose
the Hat. It's going to be hard for me to sit down and watch her as Lady Jessica in Dune without sitting there going, "Where's my hat?" I will also say that it's definitely a bit squishy with their capacity to sit around and make reality a weird kind of.
There's that whole segment where Abra goes into above the earth and is, looking down on where she's going, and then she ends up spying on Rose, and then Rose does the same thing to her, and she sees inside her mind, and it's like a big file cabinet, like a big library.
Yep.
And I just loved all that. The fact that it's probably, I haven't read the book, but I can imagine Stephen King mentioning that in like 2 sentences, and then this director just took it and ran with it, you know. So I got to say, press play. I can see if you're a fan of The Shining and you're really and you consider it the greatest horror movie ever made. I consider it in my top 5. and you go into this and you see it, you may respond positively, you may respond negatively, depends on how willing you are to allow us a new vision to take over this storyline. And I was in for it. I loved it. I was moved by it. I thought it works. I'll give this, it has this over the Kubrick movie. It's has way more emotional resonance. It's way more moving, and it's way more thought out in terms of how everything works in the universe.
I would agree.
Like, comment, and subscribe.